and lunchtime. Please welcome from the Maori Economic Task Force, June McCabe.
Sorry. Kia ora koutou, acknowledging the Fabian Society for the invitation to come and speak today. The members of Parliament who may not be here, but acknowledging them, and all the speakers before me who I feel quite humbled to be alongside. I am going to talk about the Māori economy, and when I look in the audience, it's quite a challenge. I know there are one or two of you in here. I firstly want to just advise you that I am not an economist. I've had 14 years alongside my day job, which has predominantly been in the private sector and public sector. I have worked in policy forums for government to tackle this issue of how to accelerate Māori economic development. My experience spans many sectors at governance levels, senior management levels, so in that sense I'm a generalist. So it's a dangerous thing. What I thought I'd do firstly is give some context, because for many people here I'm sure it's very interesting to wonder or to think about what is this Māori economy, and I want you to kind of understand from where I come on these issues, because someone who kind of works in two worlds and tries to build bridges between these two worlds, it's actually quite lonely because not many people operate in that bridge building space. So I operate in a space where I have many people, friends and colleagues and associates who continually tell me things like, haven't you guys got enough yet? When are you going to get on and do something with it? Isn't it time to look at the future and stop the grievance process? You're in jails, you're poorly educated, you're really quite a burden on society. Then I have on the other side of the equation people who demonstrate to me every day the poverty that does exist in this country. And within that Māori do occupy a dominant part of that. Somewhere in there, we've got to find some solutions. And the bridge building is a really key element to finding those solutions. Because there's no point sitting there and saying, you've got problems, fix them. Because this is a collaborative exercise, and it's back to the earlier comment about being on the same waka. So, Māori economic development, for me, I look at that and I think about Māori uniqueness as an opportunity for this country, locally and globally. I think the value of Māori is not understood by most people on both sides, Māori and non-Māori. But when you go overseas, you understand the value. Because culture-to-culture engagement is actually quite phenomenal. And how people respond to who we are, like Bahaka, to use that as a case in point, when you're overseas, it makes you feel really proud. But when you come home, what happens to that pride? What happens to the goosebumps that you get when you hear the haka and that tingling of the spine? What happens in Māori language week when people fret about saying kia ora? And then you go to Fiji, and I tell you, I was there last week, and in every step of the way, it's bula, bula, bula. And we can't seem to embrace this uniqueness. And I have to be careful, because even though I talk about that uniqueness and I look how I look, I don't actually culturally know enough to know. My Māoriness has still got some growth and development. I don't speak reo, but I see myself as this kind of bridge builder. The other thing that I see the Māori culture as a unique contribution to the society, to New Zealand's economy. And then I see how the Māori economy comprises Māori private capacity, which is the likes of me, and then Māori collective capacity, which is where you see your iwi and the settlements and the collective issues that come with that. And the key for Māori economic development is how you see the intersection between those two and how you strengthen that intersection. And when I put some numbers up later, you'll see through some work that we've done that the private Māori capacity in New Zealand is actually is returning really well. So if you think about those two circles and you think about the intersection, that's from where I come, is how we play in that intersection. And in reality, I think the global financial crisis has forced us to think about those intersections a lot more. Because if you think about things only in a private sense, and wealth creation at an individual level, you forget the other communities of interest that come off that, and greed comes from that, and that is how we end up where we end up. I think the other point I'd make about how I look at Māori economic development is most definitely in an intergenerational context. And that's because Māori development, or Māori thinking, has to be long term. It's about the next 1,000 years. It's not the next 3, 5 or 20 or 50. It's actually about 1,000 years. And that's about cultural identity, and that's how you preserve that and think about it intergenerationally. Alongside that, of course, you've got to think about all of the pillars of economic, environmental, social and cultural development. So when people talk about Māori enterprise performance and they say your return on investment is sitting at 4% and that's not good enough, well, what's the trade-off if you make it 10%? You know, what things are you giving up? So financial first thinking, I think, is not, certainly not a lens that I use. It's more fundamental to think about cause and effect and the trade-offs between those pillars. Now, just in terms of the task force, we were set up in 2009. We were set up in order to follow on the Prime Minister's Job Summit, where, you know, it was a response to the recession. And we have, in this 18 months, 2 years, developed a series of initiatives, which I'll share some of that work with you. But the Bill report was what was commissioned right at inception of my involvement. And the reason for doing that is that when I look at the Māori landscape, and we talk, this morning we've talked a lot about, you know, we're dominant in terms of agriculture, the F's, you know, fishing, farming, food, forestry. I mean, Māori assets are very strongly domiciled in those asset classes. And that's a problem. It's a problem because we're still traditional in our approach with those asset classes mainly. While there's some innovation or some value-added developments happening more latterly, it's not really that, it's not fast enough. And if we want productivity growth and innovation growth, we have to put much more effort into the alignment between science effort, research and development in order to understand and develop, you know, much more in the innovation space. Because from a Māori point of view, if we want to quantum leap those negative statistics that keep being thrown at us, we have to be very creative in order to come up to speed. So the Bill report was commissioned for two reasons. One is to try and understand from a benchmarking point of view what is the current state of the Māori economy, and then the other part of the report, more importantly, is how what would be the opportunity cost of aligning science and innovation investment. And in terms of the way forward, you know, it's really very much recognising that given the development of the Māori economy, no one-size answer will fit all. And we need a lot more flexibility in how we think about what the issues are. And to give you an example, having been involved for 14 odd years, it's the same conversations, you know, and it is really frustrating. I was talking to Ellen we had the same conversations over and over and over and over again. So it needs to stop, and we need to get on and do stuff. And the problem is, people want the perfect answer. And you know what? There isn't one. And that's fundamentally the problem, because then you get risk aversion, because nobody wants to try anything, because who will I let down? Who will I upset? And this is not going to work. And auntie and uncle will get really upset at me if I make that investment decision. I mean, it's amazing the struggle that Maori leaders have in trying to balance and marry up the expectations of people as individuals at different levels. A marae who has its own agenda, a hapu and an iwi, because there are different requirements of those levels, and leadership in Māoridom has to work through all those layers. So the way forward is not simple, and the way forward has to be many things to give them a go and at least try something. And that's kind of some of the solutions that I'm going to be talking about. I think the other thing is, though, generally speaking, I'm over the comparison thing about Maori and non-Maori. I'm tired of being told that we're not as good as some of you. And so my motivation is to kind of think, well, some of these issues come from somewhere. They're systemic. Short-term thinking won't deal with them. Any longer-term thinking, because it is intergenerational and it is transformational. So if you park some of that, just say, then what is available to us to access? And it is, those things that I particularly try and focus on. So if I look at the asset base, and this was launched or released in May this year. Now, I'm only going to pick a couple of things out because there's too many economists in the room and I'll get in trouble because I'm trying to interpret the figures. But I think if you get back to the point I was trying to make about private Maori capacity, if you look at that, you will see that 20.86, as well as adding the 5.4, those two numbers, that is the private Maori capacity. So iwi actually, or collective, is actually quite relatively small. So what would you do about that? And it gets back to Steve's comments about entrepreneurial development, or looking at how to support Maori businesses. How do you join the dots to expedite some of their business deals and get quality deal flow? Because that area really will give you the higher, a bigger upside downstream. And I also add that Burl have looked at the opportunity cost of taking a 50-year view. But in terms of the snapshot today, these are the numbers. And then in a GDP context, we're very much on the spending side, the cost side, expenditure side, and we're definitely not playing in the investment side. So what Burl had subsequently done, and just by way of illustration in terms of the private capacity, Maori employers, there's 5,690 Maori employers generating that number. And there's 400,000 or nearly 500,000 of us, and there's that many people doing that. I mean, imagine if you even doubled that in a year or two. So there's something about how you start to think about where to put effort and energy. And the interesting challenge that iwi have with this, which is an experience that I had really recently, when the iwi leader said to me, why should we do stuff that helps individual Maori become wealthy? And I said, well, if you have in your area, your tribal area, wealthy Maori, imagine the spin-off benefit of that. And I was able to use Ian Taylor as an example of a Maori who goes to the world, is ambassadorial in terms of his ability to represent Maori in that global context as an entrepreneur. So there's some really short, some really narrow-minded views on wealth and wealth creation, and that is a problem. Just to move it on, the issues now, Burl were asked to look at scenarios around production, export, research and science and technology investment, and also at a do-nothing scenario. And these are the issues that they came up with. I won't go through all of them, but if you just look at the first two or three, well, it's easy to wrap them all into one set of comments, but information flows, they're not there in terms of understanding the needs. And that's a particular issue in the capital markets context if you're looking at investments and the demand side issues and the supply side issues. Communication, there's an inability to be able to take some concepts and actually communicate them down to, when I say down, I mean to all levels within that particular tribal area, where you have to rely on the vote or the support of people in that tribal area to get some things done. Attitudes to risk, and this is a really big issue because you've got an innate conservatism sitting in Māoridom, so the willingness to even look at risk or look at investment is actually very far away from anything, and that's really quite frustrating for younger, emerging and up-and-coming leadership who really want to get on and do some things. You've got real weaknesses in governance, you've got absolute weaknesses in management. In some tribes you're lucky to have one really good person, but they get burnt out before they're 45 because they're doing everything. So there's some real challenging issues, and one of the most challenging, I think, is there is the lack of vision, and so much effort and energy goes into trying to kind of survive, I guess, at one level without really having that direction. And the problem with that in a Maori context is that you will always fail because there's no expectation, no clarity of expectation. And there's capability and capacity issues. All these issues, well, in some respects also impact the overall economy. They are actually very more enhanced, if you like, in the Maori economy. So the challenges sit around how you protect your asset base, the whole productivity growth and innovation growth. And there was a wonderful Maori man the other day who talked about the concerns he had about the treaty settlement process when he said it's like the cash being dropped at the farm gate and mildew growing on it, because people don't really know how to take that and invest in an intergenerational sense. The opportunity that is identified by Bill in this scenario testing, and in the folder there's quite a lot of other elements of benefit that's recorded there. But we're looking at, a 12.5 billion extra GDP per annum uplift, and these are the job creation issues. I come from the very far north, where the dominant number of Maori there, 30% of the population. It is the most depressed part of the country. And yet it has beautiful landscape, it is a tourism opportunity, but it is the most depressed part of the economy. And unless we can get in there and start to think about how to create jobs and a future for the young people, I angst over its future. Although there is a bit of excitement about the Rugby World Cup, funny that. And the do-nothing scenario, which is the maintenance, that no investment, is that you'll actually end up in a negative situation. Solutions, and these represent here many of the things that I, through the task force, have been able to get going, start stimulating how we might do this. First one is around shifting paradigms, and that's not just Māori paradigms, that's institutional paradigms about collective assets and products and financial services for collective assets. In fact, the Capital Markets Task Force talked about New Zealand potentially being an agriculture hub, the capital markets, and I talk about an Indigenous hub, because if we are smart about how we manage our collective assets and our collective capacities, that is a global opportunity with other Indigenous populations. But the paradigm issue sits at many different levels. It is about how the structures of Māoridom are modified and more contemporary, if you like, in order to accommodate some of the more savvy and smart potential people that can come in and contribute, who are not going to be afraid of cultural protocols, who are embraced by the leaders to be able to come and add to the enterprise development. So the paradigm issue is quite a phenomenal one. This is why we have to take a long-term view. And one of the problems in Māoridom is that we do have a high dependency on the Crown, that we're so tied to the Crown that every focus that you'll hear about is how the Crown can edit us, and we kind of have become lost in that. And my argument is think beyond the crown and think intergenerationally. What in 50 years' time can you imagine we look like? And full participation and being able to make choices is some of that vision in my head. Collaboration and alignment. A lot of this is known in the marketplace around iwi collaboration. That's important. But collaboration with the science sector is what the Bell Report's really enhanced. And it's about genuine engagement, not tokenistic engagement. And being someone who has seen a lot of tokenistic offerings in the past, you know, the genuineness is really key because that's about building trust and confidence. And I think in the Māori economy, trust and confidence is very much lacking. And every time you hear a bad story, of course, Holden Meriden actually feels and suffers from that kind of criticism. So this genuine relationship building and this idea that I talk about bridge building between worlds, it's all about how you allow your cultural identity at its place whilst trying to achieve what's good for the whole economy. The third point about an ecosystem, and to some extent that's pretty similar to what was discussed earlier, where we can join the dots, and it's about how you get quality deal flow. And another word or term I'm using for this initiative is around pastoral care. So as you move your business along the continuum, where do you go to help you build your business into a high growth, high export growth business? And that pastoral care is absent. So this ecosystem is designed around preserving that Māori uniqueness, moving that into the competitive advantage space, but joining the dots so we can get deal flow. And then the next part of it, in terms of financial intermediation and capital markets, is how then you can get access to capital and how you get interested investors in what you do. So there's work going on around how you would look at share trading, for example, trading your Maori shares, not so much in a iwi sense, but in a corporation sense, or being able to see the value of your shares so you can look at your executive of your organisation so you can hold them accountable for the performance of that entity. So we're looking at shared treasury, we're looking at how you can aggregate assets like fishing, farming, quota, those sorts of things so that we can get the benefit of that trade with that scale. And we're looking at an innovation fund, which is all about once you've got your deal flow and you've got quality deal flow, will they get access to the equity they need, and can we build that? So these initiatives are all going on as we speak to try and develop them up into opportunities to grow the Māori economy. These two, these two phrases or sayings are things that guide me pretty much. And the first one we've talked about in some senses when I talk about Maori collective capacity and private capacity, but it's all about understanding how the tools of the Pākehā can help us grow while preserving our uniqueness and holding on to that. The other one is from Rosalith Moss-Cantor, and she's done a lot of studies on confidence at country levels, organisational levels, community levels and individual levels, and articulates well some of the successes and failures. And what really, it's highlighted that it's the sweet spot. Confidence is the sweet spot between arrogance and despair, and I like that. And it's how do you hang on to that sweet spot? Because in many examples of things that I see, you get a lot of arrogance or you get a lot of doom and gloom, and it's how you stay in the sweet spot. So thank you for listening. I know it's a difficult subject for some of you, but I leave you with those two wonderful guiding principles. Kia ora.